What's going on, guys? It's Scott here and welcome back to FudgeMuppet. Today we're glad to be returning with one of our classic trademark spicy new vanilla Skyrim builds. That's right, this one is for all of you, even if you can't get your hands on any mods. But while today's build is vanilla, we've created a unique character with an original playstyle and a killer aesthetic. This is the Inquisitor, our Necrom Purifier build. The Inquisitor hails from the City of the Dead. On the east coast of Morrowind, there is a giant necropolis. It is a sacred place where the most prolific names in Dunmer history and the most fearsome warriors go to rest. In this city, the living are close to their gods, and reverence is sacred. So when the undead meddle with the Dunmeri tradition, it takes a mighty, fearless dark elf to protect Morrowind's honor from evil. One caretaker will descend into the depths of Necrom's sprawling underground catacombs to purge his holy city from the vampiric grip of the undead. And when he returns to the surface, no Myr is more suited to cleansing Tamriel of the abominable, sinful creatures plaguing the shadows. With his skull face paint, he is like the Reaper when he hunts the undead, punishing those who have violated this sanctity of death. And with his dragonbone sword and a shield which radiates holy sunlight, the unholy monstrosities don't stand a chance. If you saw our recent video on naming characters, you'll know a lot about how to make authentic Dunmeri character names. And while we won't always do this, we thought we'd add to the immersion and create a suitable full name for our Inquisitor. He is Raven Drath. That is Raven spelled R-A-Y-V-N and Drath spelled D-R-A-T-H. Also, if you're wondering how to pull off this intimidating badass aesthetic, here's how to do it. Pick the Dark Elf preset with the white eyes and the skull face paint, then give him full muscle and change his hairstyle to the one you can see here. Lastly, timestamps for video navigation can be found in the description below, but with that out of the way, let's get started. The Inquisitor is a Dark Elf, which means he'll start the game with +10 destruction. He'll also be able to call upon his ancestors' wrath once a day for 60 seconds, surrounding himself in flames which deal 8 points of proximity fire damage. To top it off, he'll have a 50% resistance to fire damage. We're going to be using the Lover's Standing Stone to begin with, which will allow us to level skills evenly, but then, in the end game, if you're going for raw protection and efficiency in combat, you know it, guys, you've got to take the Atronach Stone. It's extremely useful in particular for this character who already has more limited protection, especially against spells from vampires who often have powerful destruction, frost magic, and so on. As for stats, put 40% into health to help you stay alive alongside a set of armor that isn't exactly the strongest, and then put 30% into magicka, which will definitely be enough for all spellcasting alongside our massive enchantment reduction. It will also help our enchanted fire damage sword. Then put the last 30% into stamina for power attacks, shield bashing, charging, and sustaining the sunlight shield effects for long durations. We also have an absorb stamina enchantment on our sword to bolster this. All of these stats will also be further increased by enchantments. The Inquisitor, Raven Drath, was born in the City of the Dead, Necrom. Here, Dunmer tradition, religious values, and reverence for ancestors dominates the atmosphere, and a veil of solemnity is draped over the sacred walls and white towers, making it the hub of the necropolis. The city-sized cemetery begins in the west, while all the way over to the east, peace and quiet is less abundant. On the eastern coast of Morrowind, Necrom is the only major port for leagues. The city of Tyr is a long voyage south, and as a result, this ceremonious city doubles up as a major port. Raven's father owns the lighthouse atop the cliffs of Necrom, and it was his responsibility to help sailors make anchorage without crashing into the perilously rocky shores. In Necrom, the most prestigious Dark Elves sent their kin to be buried in ornate labyrinthian crypts, and as a result, the inhabitants of the city were usually very pious, God-fearing types. In the Inquisitor's household, things were no different. He worshipped the reclamations and prayed to their shrines every day. The other thing he did every day was learn to fight. His father was a burly Myr by elven standards, and in the rare event of pirates pillaging the rough, choppy shores of Necrom, him and his son would be well prepared. So he learned to wield a sword and shield. When he was old enough to contribute to the household, he took on a well-respected job in Necrom. He became the junior caretaker in the cemetery. This allowed the Inquisitor to see the world and the city of Necrom through a new lens. It was a long walk to work. He lived on the eastern shores, while the majority of the tombs and crypts were found in the west. He also worked many nights tending to thousands of individual graves. The senior caretaker, a grey, wizened Dunmer, encouraged him to learn basic destruction. Getting lost in the catacombs and having your candle burn out was a death sentence. so mundane fire spells were essential. After a few years, he had learned to navigate the endless crypts. It wasn't until his 5th year in the job that something felt awry to Raven. He had noticed a peculiar surge in deaths over the last few months, and he had begun personally inspecting the bodies of all the new residents to the Dead City cemeteries. In many cases, the deceased had very obvious, often gruesome wounds. Usually this would have just been shrugged off as countless warriors were buried in Necrom, but even females and elderly males seemed to have fatal wounds. Upon inspection, the Inquisitor noticed marks on the necks of the dead. The marks had been meticulously cleaned and concealed to look like little more than indents, but Raven saw a pattern. They looked like bite marks. A few days after his disturbing discovery, a frail old widow asked Raven to replace the flowers at her former husband's tomb. They had been rather wealthy, and he had secured 2 places in the largest of Necrom's catacombs, one now occupied by the husband and one empty, reserved for her. The only problem was that they were not wealthy enough to pick a prime spot, and their tombs were situated deep within the silent maze. The widow would never be able to find it alone, and besides, she was afraid of the spirits that dwelt within the crypts. With a lantern in one hand and a bunch of flowers in the other, Raven descended into the catacombs. As he ventured deeper, he was overcome by the usual sense of awe. Some of these catacombs were so expansive that they were cities in their own right. By the next bell, he found the tomb. He removed the withered flowers and replaced them with new ones. The candlelight wouldn't sustain them for long, and soon they would just die out like everything else within. As he turned to leave, he noticed a slight stirring in the empty adjacent alcove. The faint light from Raven's lantern painted a shape with the shadowy recess, and he could just about make out a gaunt white face with eyes like glowing coals and 2 sharp pointed fangs emerging from beneath the curled lips of a wide grin. He reached for his sword, but it wasn't there. As he gripped his belt, the thing lunged. It twisted its head and sprung face first at his neck. Instinctively, Raven swung his lantern. The glass shattered across the beast's face. The opening maw of the vampire shrieked in pain as shards ripped through skin. Before it could recoil, the burning oil ignited his flesh and engulfed him. The Inquisitor reached for the vampire's dagger and he thrust it deep into the creature's heart. It slumped to the ground and Raven masked his face against the stench of smoldering skin. When the fire subsided, he was left in darkness. He flicked his fingers, casting a minor spell, and lit a nearby candle before hastily making his way to the surface. He reported this encounter to the senior caretaker immediately, but the old Mer didn't have the mental faculties to deal with such things. He knew it was on him. Never again did Raven go to work without his sword and shield. As he scoured the city of the dead, searching every nook for the vampiric parasites. His search was not in vain. He found many more vampires, slaying them and burning their remains in the crematorium of the catacombs. After killing a few more, Raven found a rather talkative vampire. This one fought well, nearly besting the Inquisitor, but once Raven had subdued them at sword point, he discovered the reason behind the abundance of vampires in Necrom. The Ornday vampire clan of Vardenfell were active across the city. They were killing innocents, feeding on them, and then planned to reanimate hordes of them from within the crypts. But this vampire was arrogant. He was a Nord, not your typical Ultima Ornday vampire. He told Raven of a grand scheme, one which would see the sun blocked out for all time, allowing the Volkihar clan and all the other clans to live out in the open, predators in an eternal hunting ground. Raven cut the beast's throat then, and the monster died laughing. He then knew what he had to do. He resigned from his role as caretaker and used his acquired wealth to journey west across Morrowind. He was adamant about killing vampires, and he kept his eyes peeled for Nords who could give him clues about the whereabouts of the Volkihar clan. This search took him to the Volothi Mountains on the border to Skyrim, only he was caught in the crossfire of a Civil War skirmish and wrongfully taken prisoner. Manacled and thrown in the back of a cart, he was taken to Helgen for execution, only he escaped. With his freedom restored, he returns to his duty. Here in Skyrim, the undead seem to outnumber the living, and he will fight his way through the depths beneath the snows, purging every crypt of undead, as well as clearing the province of necromancers, vampires, and all who meddle with the dark arts. Most importantly, he will do whatever he can to track down the Volkihar clan and tear them down. In this civil war-torn province, reverence for the dead seems to be a forgotten concept, and to traditional Dunmer of Necrom, this is sacrilege. Anyone who disrupts the sanctity of death and proper burial will be brought to justice, and the land will be purified by the hands of Raven Drath. As a traditional Dark Elf, he worships his ancestors and will pray to the reclamations when possible. As a result, he will never betray Azura, and will serve her to get Azura's star. He has no real love for the Aedra, and doesn't worship Stendarr like the Dawnguard seem to, but common interests will see him aligned with them. So as for factions, you'll of course want to prioritize the Dawnguard DLC, siding with the Dawnguard and using them as backup when taking down Lord Harkon and his Volkihar clan. The main story will allow him to access some useful undead purging powers, Fire Breath being a staple, but this will also allow him to follow up the Dragonborn DLC, in which he will have an interest. He cares for the well-being of Solstheim and its people, and will pay his dues at the Temple in Ravenrock. The College of Winterhold is a good excuse to hone his destruction skill, and Azura's quest siding with Azura is a must. He also reveres Mephala and Boethia, but he doesn't have to do their quests. He's not evil and will be averse to enduring their tasks. Work towards getting the Severin Manor in Ravenrock whenever you can, as this will serve as your new home. So now that we have his backstory, role-playing and factions all sorted, let's take a look at how that will impact his skills, spells, perks, and his overall playstyle. The main skills for this build will be one-handed, block, destruction, light armor, smithing, and enchanting. There's a few skill trees to look into, but before we do, let's quickly go over his spells and shouts. Fireball and Wall of Flames will be his two main choices, and he will often be switching out to a sword and shield. Feel free to experiment with any fire destruction spells though. As for shouts, once again feel free to experiment, but Fire Breath is the main option that suits Raven's playstyle. Choose this as the focus from Paarthurnax as well. Anyways, these are the Inquisitor's essential perks. Trained by the heat of a burning lighthouse pyre, the Inquisitor mastered the sword and shield style of fighting. What was intended to be used against pirates instead was used to clean the catacombs of Necrom from the vampire menace. Whoever the foe, Raven Drath fights with equal vigor. From the one-handed skill tree, take the middle branch up to Savage Strike. Savage Strike will grant a 25% boost to power attack damage and will give you the opportunity to decapitate your enemies. And then from the block skill tree, grab absolutely everything. Some good perks here include Shield Charge and Quick Reflexes. The former allows you to barrel through your enemies with a shield raised, sending them flying, and the latter slows down time when you have your shield raised during an incoming power attack. The Dunmer are one with the element of fire. Raven is not only resistant to the flames, but his line of work forced him to master the element for survival. Fire guides him through the crypts of Skyrim and Morrowind, and fire is his trusty tool for purging the undead from the world. From the destruction skill tree, go for the full far left branch, and then the fourth branch up to Adept Destruction. Augmented Flames will bolster your fire spell damage by 50%, and Incinerate will send ignited enemies fleeing when they're low on health. Nothing stops a vampire's bite like thick, sturdy armor, and if any undead try to kill the Inquisitor, they'll have to punch through leather. This is why Raven wears light armor. From this skill tree, take 5 ranks of the first perk. Ever the hard worker, Raven taught himself to maintain his arms and armor on the road. Slaying vampires is a surefire way to blunt a sword, but the Inquisitor is always prepared. In a similar vein, Raven enchants his gear to get the most from it. This allows his weapons to set fire to his foes and trap their souls. It also gives him vital fortifications to ward off hordes of undead and strengthen his blows. From the smithing skill tree, we suggest taking Arcane Blacksmith and the right branch around to Dragon Smithing, and then from the enchanting skill tree, follow the middle branch all the way up to and including extra effect, and then grab Fire Enchanter as well. With all of these skill spells and perks in mind, here is how the Inquisitor will play in combat. When entering battle, you can drop a few fireballs in the distance to get some early explosive area damage, but once you've closed in on them, or you're in the close confines of a tomb, you'll want to switch to Wall of Flames and then use it to set up some defenses. Use it to cover your flanks and keep aggressive enemies at bay, and then use your shield to block and your sword to strike foes down. Once your flames dwindle, either shield charge, knocking your enemies down to buy time to put up more walls, or simply kick them while they're down, finishing them with flames, or your sword without a need for new defenses. You should be able to gauge the situation and decide which option is best in the moment. We always keep the shield in the left hand, and we will block with it more consistently around undead, who will take damage from the sun shield it creates. So your right hand will alternate between destruction and melee. Finally, we'll throw in Fire Breath shouts whenever desired. As for gear, Raven will be decked out in Dawnguard armor with Thalmor gloves and boots. The Inquisitor has no affiliation with the Thalmor, and this is purely an aesthetic choice. On the top of that, any silver jewelry you can find. All of this stuff should be enchanted and smithed up to their maximum potentials. Same goes for the weapons, which will be a dragonbone sword crafted personally, and then the Dawnguard rune shield. As for enchantments, the sword will need Fiery Soul Trap and Absorb Stamina. This does fire damage and is great against vampires, and it traps souls into your Azura's Star, ready for new enchantments. Absorb Stamina is also helpful as it allows you to restore the stamina needed for our shield effect. On the gloves, you'll want Fortify One-Handed and Fortify Magicka. On the boots, you'll want Fortify One-Handed and Fortify Stamina. On the chest armor, put Fortify Destruction and Fortify Health, and then on the jewelry, prioritize Fortify One-Handed and Fortify Destruction. We cannot enchant the rune shield as this already has its own unique effects. Aside from looking awesome, the shield will boost bash damage by 10, and holding the shield in a block position will create a sun barrier, dishing out 10 points of damage while draining stamina. And there you have it, guys. Subscribe if you're new here and give the video a like if you want to see more vanilla builds. Timestamps and social media links can be found below in the description. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I've been Scott, and I look forward to nerding out with you again next time.